More than 3,000 years ago, during China's Shang Dynasty, there lived a remarkable woman. She was one of King Wu Ding's most important queens and one of the earliest female military commanders in Chinese history, whose existence is firmly documented by written records. Oracle bone inscriptions reveal that she took part in military campaigns and presided over royal rituals. In an age defined by bronze, warfare, and ancestor worship, she wielded a level of authority that few women of her time could have imagined. Yet the most extraordinary discovery connected to her did not come from an ancient battlefield. It emerged from a tomb that lay hidden beneath the earth for more than 3 millennia. In 1976, archaeologists uncovered the tomb of Fu Hao at Yinshu, the ruins of the last Shang capital. It was astonishingly well preserved. Nearly 2,000 burial objects were recovered, including an exquisite bronze owl-shaped vessel and a massive bronze battle axe weighing almost 9 kilograms, a symbol of supreme military authority. Even more remarkable, many of the bronze vessels were inscribed with the name Fu Hao, matching more than 200 oracle bone inscriptions that record her life and activities. At first glance, this appeared to be the burial of a victorious queen. But as archaeologists continued clearing the chamber, they uncovered something far more unsettling. Lying beside the magnificent bronze ritual vessels, the very symbols of royal power and prestige, were the remains of 16 human burial attendants. How did a woman who once commanded armies and presided over state rituals ultimately become part of a burial system built upon human sacrifice and ritual death? Fu Hao's tomb reveals far more than the life of an extraordinary woman. It opens a window into the world of the Shang Dynasty, a civilization where power, faith, and sacrifice were woven together into the fabric of society over 3,000 years ago. In the spring of 1976, a team from the Institute of Archaeology of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences was conducting exploratory drilling in farmland northwest of Xiaotun village at Yinshu, near Anyang in Henan province. The land was scheduled to be leveled for agricultural use, and the archaeologists had been sent to investigate what lay beneath the surface before any ancient remains could be destroyed. As the drill descended, it encountered an unexpected resistance at a depth of about 7.5 meters. After the topsoil was carefully removed, the outline of a vertical shaft tomb gradually emerged, measuring approximately 5.6 meters long and 4 meters wide. The tomb had no entrance passage, a characteristic feature of Shang Dynasty vertical pit burials. Its burial chamber extended deep underground, and evidence suggested that water had accumulated inside for centuries. During the excavation, archaeologists identified traces of a wooden outer coffin and a lacquered inner coffin, both of which had long since decayed. Raised ledges, known as second-tier platforms, surrounded the burial chamber, while recessed niches had been constructed into both the eastern and western walls. Every architectural detail was meticulously recorded, providing invaluable data for future research. Even more intriguing, the tomb lay directly beneath the remains of a Shang Dynasty building foundation, later identified as the ritual hall known as the Muxin Ancestral Shrine. This suggests that not long after Fu Hao was buried, a dedicated ceremonial structure was erected above her tomb to continue honoring her. Among all the Shang Dynasty tombs excavated at Yinshu, Fu Hao's tomb is one of the best preserved. Unlike most royal burials, it shows no evidence of large-scale looting, and the majority of the burial objects remained close to their original positions. Time, however, had taken its toll. Centuries of groundwater had severely damaged the wooden coffins, and the tomb owner's skeletal remains were almost completely lost, making detailed physical anthropological analysis impossible. Although this is not uncommon in Shang archaeology, it has left many questions about Fu Hao herself unanswered. In total, archaeologists recovered 1,928 burial objects. These included 468 bronze artifacts, 755 jade objects, numerous bone implements, and thousands of items made from other materials. More than 6,800 cowrie shells were also found, reflecting their importance as symbols of wealth during the Shang period. The collection included ritual vessels, weapons, ornaments, and everyday objects. Many of the bronze vessels bear inscriptions reading Fu Hao or simply Hao, while others carry the inscription Simushin. Together, these inscriptions provided crucial evidence for identifying the tomb's owner, beyond reasonable doubt. In terms of size, the tomb belonged to a medium-ranking royal burial. Its depth and construction placed it among the highest-ranking noble tombs of the Shang Dynasty, yet it remained noticeably smaller than the monumental royal tombs of the Shibeigang Cemetery, which featured multiple entrance ramps and far larger sacrificial complexes. Rather than emphasizing sheer scale, Fu Hao's tomb stood out for the extraordinary richness and completeness of its burial goods. The contrast illustrates the carefully defined hierarchy of Shang burial customs and offers rare insight into the status accorded to members of King Wuding's royal household. Its discovery itself was partly a matter of chance. The resistance felt by the drill was only the beginning. Months of painstaking excavation followed, requiring archaeologists to record and preserve nearly every object before it could be removed. The exact position, orientation, and depth of each artifact were carefully mapped and photographed, creating a permanent archaeological record that remains fundamental to research today. Excavation reports repeatedly emphasize the exceptional significance of this discovery. To this day, Fu Hao's tomb remains the only essentially intact royal tomb of the Shang Dynasty ever scientifically excavated at Yinshu, and one of the very few archaeological discoveries that can be directly correlated with historical records preserved in oracle bone inscriptions. Opening the tomb was like opening a perfectly sealed time capsule from the Bronze Age. Its significance lies not only in the extraordinary artifacts it contained, but also in the unmistakable archaeological evidence it preserved. Within the burial chamber, the remains of 16 human burial attendants and 6 sacrificial dogs were found alongside nearly 2,000 carefully arranged burial objects. This remarkable combination offers an unusually direct glimpse into the ritual world of the Shang Dynasty. The silent human remains, placed beside exquisitely crafted bronzes and jade objects, create one of the most striking contrasts within the entire tomb, and they become the starting point for a much deeper investigation into one of the most extraordinary civilizations of the ancient world. Inside Fu Hao's tomb, archaeologists discovered the remains of 16 human burial attendants and 6 sacrificial dogs. Together, they provide some of the clearest archaeological evidence for the practice of human burial accompaniment in Shang Dynasty elite tombs. Recovering these remains was a slow and painstaking process. The burial chamber had been flooded by groundwater for centuries, forcing archaeologists to remove the layers of earth one by one while carefully recording the exact position, orientation, posture, and archaeological context of every individual. These meticulous field records would later become the foundation for nearly all subsequent research. The human remains were distributed throughout several distinct areas of the tomb. The most prominent locations were 2 recessed wall niches, one built into the eastern wall and the other into the western wall of the burial chamber. 2 individuals were found in the eastern niche, while a single individual occupied the western one. Because these niches were positioned higher than the chamber floor, some of the skeletons survived in relatively better condition. Additional burial attendants were placed on the raised ledges that surrounded the central coffin chamber, architectural features known as second-tier platforms, a common element in high-ranking Shang tombs. Other fragmentary human remains were recovered from the floor of the burial chamber and from the surrounding fill, suggesting that some individuals may have been repositioned after death or disturbed during different stages of the burial process. The remains of 6 dogs were found primarily inside the Yaoking, or waste pit, a small pit dug beneath the floor of the tomb, as well as near several of the human burial attendants. One dog had been placed at the bottom of the waste pit alongside a human sacrificial victim, a combination that appears to have carried symbolic significance in Shang funerary ritual. Although the burial chamber covered little more than 20 square meters, it contained not only these human and animal remains, but also 1,128 burial objects. The confined working space, combined with groundwater that had once risen to approximately 6.4 meters, made the excavation exceptionally difficult. Ironically, some of the burial attendants survived in part because they lay close to the ancient waterline, while Fu Hao's own wooden coffins had almost completely decayed after centuries of prolonged flooding. The positions of the burial attendants varied considerably, suggesting that they had been placed in different ways during the funeral ceremony. Some individuals lay on their sides with their legs tightly flexed, while others were found face down with their limbs drawn beneath their bodies. Several had their hands positioned in front of them, while others had their arms behind their backs. Within the wall niches, some skeletons appeared to have been placed in kneeling or half-kneeling positions, most facing toward the center of the burial chamber. Elsewhere, archaeologists encountered scattered skeletal elements, sometimes little more than a skull accompanied by fragments of the torso. These disturbed remains may indicate that some bodies were repositioned after decapitation, although later disturbance within the tomb cannot be ruled out. Anthropological analysis was limited by the poor preservation of the bones, but several individuals could still be identified. Among the 16 burial attendants were at least 4 males, including 1 young adult and 2 females. The sex and age of the remaining individuals could not be determined with confidence. Wear patterns on the teeth and signs of skeletal stress suggest that some of them had performed regular physical labor during their lives. The dogs were generally found lying on their sides or curled up beside the human remains. These burial positions do not appear to have been random. Kneeling postures and tightly flexed limbs may reflect prescribed ritual positions, while the scattered skeletal remains point to a more complex sequence of funerary practices. Excavation reports also note that several skeletons were still encased in dense, waterlogged mud when they were uncovered, requiring archaeologists to separate the bones with extraordinary care. Within Shang elite burials, the practice of human burial accompaniment appears to have served several distinct purposes. The first was rooted in the belief often summarized as serving the dead as one served the living. Death was not understood as the end of social life, but as its continuation in another realm. The deceased would still require attendants, guards, and companions, and those buried alongside the tomb owner were expected to continue fulfilling those roles in the afterlife. The second function was to display rank and political status. A total of 16 burial attendants represents a substantial number for a royal tomb of this size, reflecting Fu Hao's exceptional standing as one of King Wu Ding's most influential queens. The third was religious. Human attendants became part of a broader ritual system through which the living sought to maintain communication with royal ancestors and supernatural powers. In this sense, burial attendants were not merely servants. They became participants in the sacred relationship between the human world and the spiritual realm. Fu Hao's tomb represents a form of personal funerary accompaniment, rather than the large-scale public sacrificial ceremonies found in the royal cemetery at Shibeigang. This distinction reveals an important hierarchy within Shang funerary customs. The number of people buried, the manner of their burial, and the purpose they served all varied according to the status of the tomb owner. Yet beneath these differences lies the same underlying principle. Human lives could be deliberately incorporated into the world of the dead as part of an established ritual tradition. Questions that remain unanswered. Despite the remarkable detail preserved by the excavation, many aspects of the burial ceremony remain impossible to reconstruct. The precise sequence of executions, whether prayers or divination accompanied the ritual, and whether the individuals entered the tomb willingly or under coercion, all remain unknown. The bones preserve physical evidence, but they cannot reveal emotions, intentions, or personal choices. Centuries of groundwater damage have also limited what archaeologists can learn from the skeletons themselves. If the tomb were excavated today, advances in forensic science and ancient DNA analysis might answer questions that were beyond the reach of researchers in 1976. For now, those possibilities remain out of reach. It is this uncertainty that continues to give Fu Hao's tomb its enduring sense of mystery. The 16 skeletons now exist only as archaeological evidence, preserved in excavation reports, museum reconstructions, and academic studies. Their individual stories survive only in fragments. Every new examination of the bones, every fresh interpretation of the oracle bone inscriptions has the potential to reshape our understanding. At the same time, each new discovery reminds us that archaeology can never recover every detail of the past. The burial attendants of Fu Hao's tomb allow us to confront one of the most unsettling realities of Shang civilization. Together with the extraordinary collection of burial objects, they form a complete funerary landscape, one that reflects both political authority and deeply rooted religious belief. Through these silent remains, we see more than statistics or archaeological data. We glimpse one of the most profound and difficult aspects of Shang society itself. Our understanding of these 16 burial attendants rests primarily on three sources: the excavation report published after the 1976 discovery, the physical evidence preserved on the bones, and the detailed field records produced during excavation. Even so, many interpretations remain the subject of scholarly debate. The first challenge is preservation. Centuries of groundwater exposure eroded much of the skeletal material, making it difficult to determine exactly when certain cut marks were inflicted, whether during life, at the moment of execution, or as the result of later disturbance within the tomb. Some researchers argue that the kneeling individuals found in the wall niches are more likely to have been buried alive. Others caution that, in the absence of definitive evidence, such as signs of suffocation or recognizable soil compression around the bodies, such conclusions remain speculative. For this reason, archaeological reports generally employ careful language, favoring expressions such as may have or possibly rather than presenting certainty where none exists. The identities of the burial attendants remain equally uncertain. One interpretation suggests that those whose bodies were carefully arranged and accompanied by small burial objects were household attendants or close servants of Fu Hao. Another proposes that at least some were prisoners of war, citing the evidence of violent injuries and the overall scale of the burial. Without inscriptions identifying these individuals or objects that clearly indicate their status, no consensus has yet emerged. This uncertainty reflects one of the broader challenges of Shang archaeology. Written records preserved on oracle bones and the archaeological evidence uncovered in the ground do not always fit together perfectly. Instead, researchers must constantly compare, question, and reassess both forms of evidence in order to approach a more complete understanding of the past. The most important written evidence in this process comes from the oracle bone inscriptions, whose divinatory texts form the core of what we know about the Shang royal court. The most important written evidence comes from what are known today as the oracle bone inscriptions. At their core, these inscriptions were the official records of royal divination carried out by the Shang court. They were not myths or later historical accounts. They were working documents created as the Shang kings attempted to seek guidance from their royal ancestors and the spirit world. The divination process itself followed a carefully prescribed ritual. Court diviners first prepared the shoulder blade of an ox or the underside of a turtle shell by carving a series of small hollows into its reverse side. A heated metal rod was then applied to these hollows. As the bone expanded under intense heat, it cracked suddenly, producing distinctive fracture patterns on the opposite surface. These cracks, known as jiao, or divinatory signs, were believed to reveal the will of supernatural forces. The king, or in some cases, senior diviners acting on his behalf, interpreted these patterns to determine whether an undertaking would be auspicious or inauspicious. Afterward, scribes carved a permanent record beside the cracks. These inscriptions usually preserved three essential elements: the question that had been asked, the king's interpretation of the omen, and, in many cases, the eventual outcome. Together, these remarkable records form what we now call the oracle bone inscriptions. They are among the earliest surviving written archives in Chinese history. Viewed in a broader archaeological context, the 16 burial attendants found in Fu Hao's tomb represent a relatively high number for a royal tomb of medium size. They are by no means the largest examples of human burial accompaniment from the Shang Dynasty. In the Great Royal Cemetery at Shibeigang, sacrificial pits from the late Shang period often contained dozens or even hundreds of human victims. Some pits held only severed heads, others contained headless bodies. The forms of sacrifice were both larger in scale and more varied. This contrast reflects the hierarchy built into Shang funerary practice. Private royal burials, such as Fu Hao's, emphasized attendants who would accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The vast sacrificial complexes of the royal cemetery, by contrast, were dedicated primarily to ancestor worship and state ritual. Similar practices have been identified in other elite Shang burials, but very few have survived as completely as Fu Hao's tomb. Looking across a longer span of Chinese prehistory, human sacrifice reached its greatest intensity during the Shang Dynasty. Scattered evidence appears as early as the late Longshan culture. During the Shang period, however, the practice became far more widespread, a development that most scholars associate with continual warfare and an exceptionally strong tradition of ancestor worship. By the Western Zhou dynasty, large-scale human sacrifice gradually gave way to symbolic substitutes, including ceramic figurines and other funerary objects. This transformation likely reflects broader changes in both social organization and religious belief. Because Fu Hao's tomb belongs securely to the reign of King Wu Ding, it offers one of the clearest archaeological snapshots of this pivotal moment in Chinese history. Like all archaeological discoveries, however, its interpretation remains open to revision. New excavation techniques, advances in scientific analysis, or future discoveries may refine or even overturn some of today's conclusions. That ongoing uncertainty is precisely what continues to make Fu Hao's tomb such an important subject of research. The oracle bone inscriptions provide the most important textual evidence for understanding both Fu Hao's burial and the ritual world in which she lived. To date, more than 200 inscriptions have been identified that refer directly to Fu Hao, nearly all dating to the reign of King Wu Ding. Most are records of divination. Rather than narrating historical events, they ask practical questions. Should a particular ritual be performed? Will this military campaign succeed? Will the outcome be favorable? These seemingly brief records preserve an extraordinary glimpse into the decision-making of the Shang royal court. Among them are several inscriptions that record Fu Hao's own participation in religious ceremonies. One asks, open quote, should Fu Hao be summoned to conduct the Liao ritual? Close quote. The Liao ritual involved burning offerings so that their smoke would rise toward the heavens. Another inscription asks, open quote, should Fu Hao perform a Yu offering to the royal ancestress Bi Geng? Close quote. Other inscriptions record ceremonies dedicated to ancestors such as Bi Gui and Father Yi, employing rituals known as Liao, Yu, and Yu, each serving a different ceremonial purpose. Taken together, these inscriptions reveal that Fu Hao occupied a remarkably prominent position within the religious life of the Shang court. She did not merely attend royal ceremonies, she was repeatedly entrusted with conducting them. In the political culture of the Shang Dynasty, where, as later texts would summarize, the greatest affairs of the state were sacrifice and warfare, that responsibility speaks volumes about her status. Divination itself lay at the heart of every major ritual. The oracle bone inscriptions are, in essence, records of that process. Court diviners prepared the bones, inscribed the questions, and interpreted the resulting cracks. On important occasions, the king himself participated in judging the omen. Some inscriptions concerning Fu Hao even record King Wu Ding asking whether she should preside over a particular ceremony. This constant interplay between divination and ritual reveals just how structured Shang religious practice had become. The oracle bones also record occasions when prisoners of war were selected as sacrificial victims. These texts provide an important context for understanding the human remains discovered in Fu Hao's tomb. Within the Shang worldview, human lives could serve not only as attendants to the dead, but also as offerings through which communication with royal ancestors and divine powers was believed to be maintained. The oracle bone inscriptions record a remarkable variety of sacrificial rites, revealing just how sophisticated Shang ritual practice had become. Fu Hao's inscriptions provide several representative examples. Liao, Yao, was a rite in which firewood or sacrificial offerings were burned, allowing the smoke to rise toward heaven. One inscription asks, should Fu Hao be summoned to conduct the Liao ritual, suggesting that she was entrusted with performing this important ceremony. Yu involved presenting wine, food, or in some cases human victims to royal ancestors as ritual offerings. Oracle texts frequently record Fu Hao conducting Yu sacrifices for the royal ancestress Bi Geng. Other ceremonies included Yu, a ritual associated with driving away misfortune or harmful spirits, and Bao, rites performed to report events or express gratitude to deceased royal ancestors. Some inscriptions also record the use of captured prisoners, particularly people identified as the Qiang, as sacrificial victims, closely matching archaeological evidence from the same period. These rituals were not isolated ceremonies, but parts of carefully organized ritual sequences. Divination almost always came first. Oracle bone consultations determined the date of the ceremony, who would preside over it, what offerings would be presented, and even how many victims were required. The inscriptions from King Wu Ding's reign show that Fu Hao was, on multiple occasions, appointed to preside over these ceremonies, an extraordinary responsibility for a royal woman in Bronze Age China. Archaeology and written records. The oracle bone inscriptions are reinforced by what archaeologists uncovered inside Fu Hao's tomb. Many of the bronze ritual vessels buried with her, including the Fang Yi, the famous owl-shaped Zun, and the triple steamer Yan, bear inscriptions identifying them as belonging to Fu Hao. Jade ritual objects, including Kong tubes and Bai discs, together with numerous bone artifacts, may also have served ceremonial purposes during her lifetime. Taken together, these objects and the oracle inscriptions tell the same story. The ritual authority Fu Hao exercised while alive continued symbolically after her death through the objects buried beside her. A world preserved only in fragments. Yet, oracle bone inscriptions are also frustratingly incomplete. Each inscription usually records only a single divination, a question posed to the ancestors, sometimes the king's interpretation, and occasionally whether the prediction proved correct. Rarely do they describe what actually happened during the ceremony itself. What did a ritual led by Fu Hao truly look like? What prayers were spoken? Was music performed? Were dancers present? The inscriptions remain almost entirely silent. To answer those questions, archaeologists must combine scattered textual evidence with physical clues, from cut marks on human bones to the arrangement of ritual vessels inside tombs, to cautiously reconstruct ceremonies that vanished more than 3,000 years ago. Even then, many interpretations remain debated. Scholars still disagree over the precise meanings of certain ritual terms and even how frequently Fu Hao personally presided over these ceremonies. As new oracle bones continue to be discovered and previously unread inscriptions are deciphered, our understanding continues to evolve. Ritual at the heart of Shang belief. For the Shang people, ancestor worship formed the foundation of their religious world. The oracle inscriptions show that sacrifices were directed primarily toward deceased kings and queens, seeking their protection, reporting military victories, or asking them to avert disasters. Fu Hao's role in these ceremonies was therefore far more than a personal duty. It placed her at the center of the royal state's religious system. This also helps explain the human sacrifices found in her tomb. Within Shang belief, human victims, whether human retainers buried to accompany the dead or human sacrifices offered directly to the ancestors, served as intermediaries between the human world and the supernatural. Together with bronze ritual vessels and jade objects, they formed a complete ceremonial system. Some oracle bone inscriptions explicitly record the sacrifice of captured prisoners of war. These texts provide an important context for understanding the 16 human victims discovered in Fu Hao's tomb. While her tomb reflects a more personal form of funerary accompaniment, far larger state-sponsored human sacrifices took place in the royal cemetery nearby. In Fu Hao's inscriptions, warfare and ritual appear side by side again and again, illustrating one of the central principles of Shang civilization. The greatest affairs of the state lay in sacrifice and in war. Despite everything the oracle bones reveal, enormous gaps remain. We still do not know the complete sequence of ceremonies conducted by Fu Hao, the exact words spoken during the rituals, or whether music and dance accompanied the sacrifices. Even when an oracle records a divination, it rarely tells us whether events unfolded exactly as predicted. Those silences are part of what makes Shang ritual so compelling. We can still read the questions carved into bone more than 3,000 years ago, but the ceremonies themselves, the voices, the smoke, the movement, the fear, have vanished forever. Modern scholarship continues to piece together this lost world by combining oracle bone studies, archaeological evidence, and contextual analysis. Yet because the surviving evidence is so fragmentary, Every newly deciphered inscription has the potential to reshape our understanding of Fu Hao's role. Through these oracle bone inscriptions, we catch rare glimpses of a remarkable woman at the center of Shang ritual life. Together with the archaeological discoveries from her tomb, they reveal not only the workings of an ancient religious system, but also provide one of the clearest windows into the relationship between power, faith, and human sacrifice in Bronze Age China. The 16 human retainers buried in Fu Hao's tomb offer us a valuable glimpse into the funerary practices of a mid-sized royal. But to fully understand what they represent, we must widen our view to the royal cemetery at Shibeigang, located within the Yin ruins. It was here that the Shang kings conducted many of their most important state rituals. Archaeological surveys and excavations have revealed a landscape dramatically different from Fu Hao's tomb. Instead of a single burial, the royal cemetery contains an enormous network of dedicated sacrificial pits. More than 2,000 sacrificial pits have been identified across the site, with over 1,400 already excavated. Human sacrificial pits make up the largest category. During a single excavation campaign in 1976 alone, archaeologists investigated 191 pits, recovering the remains of more than 1,178 individuals. In total, the number of known human sacrifices from the royal cemetery far exceeds those found in any individual tomb, illustrating the immense scale of Shang state ritual. Many of these pits were arranged in organized groups surrounding the royal tombs. Some areas contain remarkably dense concentrations of sacrificial pits, indicating that the site was used repeatedly over many generations rather than for a single ceremonial event. Unlike Fu Hao's tomb, these sacrificial pits usually stand alone or appear in long rows rather than being attached to a specific burial. This reflects a fundamental distinction within Shang ritual practice: public state ceremonies on one hand and private funerary rites on the other. Different forms of human sacrifice. Archaeological evidence reveals that several different sacrificial methods were employed. The most common was fa, ritual execution by decapitation. Numerous pits contain neatly separated skulls and headless bodies, while cut marks on the cervical vertebrae clearly indicate that sharp bronze weapons were used to sever the head. Another practice was can. In these pits, individuals are often found kneeling, crouching, or curled into tightly flexed positions. Their body posture suggests that some may have been buried alive or forced into the pits while still conscious. Other forms of sacrifice have also been identified, including liao, involving burning or fire rituals, as well as combined sacrifices in which both humans and animals were buried together. These conclusions are based primarily on skeletal analysis and the spatial arrangement of the pits. In some cases, rows of skulls were deliberately aligned to face the same direction, demonstrating that these ceremonies followed highly standardized procedures rather than chaotic acts of violence. Dogs, cattle, and sheep frequently appear alongside human victims, forming complete sacrificial assemblages intended for ritual use. Fu Hao's tomb presents a different picture. There, the human retainers were placed immediately beside the burial chamber, emphasizing their role as personal attendants accompanying the queen into the afterlife. The royal cemetery, by contrast, reflects collective sacrifices performed on behalf of the Shang state itself. Together, they reveal different levels within the Shang ritual system. The contrast becomes even clearer when viewed in terms of purpose. The sacrificial pits of the royal cemetery served the religious needs of the entire royal house and its ancestral cult. Fu Hao's retainers, however, were arranged directly beside her coffin chamber and the surrounding ledges, creating an intimate sense of personal service in the next world. If her tomb resembles a private royal household carried into eternity, the royal cemetery resembles a vast open-air ceremonial complex where the Shang kings communicated with their ancestors through sacrifice. The archaeological evidence also reveals the extraordinary ritual discipline behind these ceremonies. Fa sacrifice appears most frequently. Large pits containing separate skulls and headless torsos preserve unmistakable cut marks across the neck vertebrae, indicating execution with bronze G-daggers or ceremonial blades. The oracle bone character for Fa Fat itself is believed to depict a human figure being struck down by a bladed weapon, a remarkable example of written language reflecting ritual practice. Within the royal cemetery, many skeletons display nearly identical cut locations, while rows of skulls were carefully aligned in predetermined directions. Such consistency suggests that these were not random executions, but highly choreographed religious ceremonies carried out according to established rules. For the archaeologists excavating these pits, layer after layer of skulls and headless bodies created one of the most haunting scenes ever uncovered at Yin. Can's sacrifice presents an even more disturbing picture. Some individuals were found kneeling upright, their hands apparently bound behind their backs. Others lay tightly curled on their sides, their bodies frozen in positions that almost suggest a final struggle. Excavation reports describe these postures in remarkable detail. Although direct proof of live burial remains elusive, the skeletal positions strongly suggest that at least some victims may have entered the pits while still alive or only partially conscious. These scenes closely resemble the kneeling retainers discovered inside Fu Hao's wall niches, but on a far larger and far more systematic scale. Evidence of Liao rituals also appears within the royal cemetery. Some human remains bear traces of burning or charring, corresponding closely with oracle bone descriptions of fire offerings intended to carry sacrifices upward to heaven. Dogs, cattle, and sheep were frequently buried alongside human victims, forming carefully organized ritual assemblages. Layered burials inside foundation pits and within successive layers of fill further suggest that many ceremonies unfolded in multiple stages, beginning with foundation offerings, continuing through the principal sacrifice, and concluding with the sealing of the pit. Fu Hao's tomb therefore represents only one part of a much larger ritual landscape. Its 16 human retainers emphasize personal service to a royal individual in the afterlife. The royal cemetery, by contrast, reveals sacrifices performed on behalf of an entire dynasty. Together, they expose the hierarchical structure of Shang ritual. Mid-ranking royal burials focused on extending the deceased's personal household beyond death, while the great royal cemeteries served as the ceremonial heart of communication between the Shang kings, their ancestors, and the divine world.